to remove it. You can see it here. Texas officials setting up more razor wire yesterday in Eagle Pass.
Time you apply a consequence to a violation of law, you see the number of illegal border crossers drop exponentially.
Razor wire, as far as the eye can see, also within my line of sight. Texas National Guard armed and on standby.
So the court's conservative majority was divided in its 5-4 decision in favor of the Biden administration's argument.
The state's response to the unprecedented illegal crossings on our border.
Now we go to the southern border where the governor of Texas refuses to give in to federal law.
The United States Supreme Court has hereforth ruled that Border Patrol agents can go ahead with cutting a razor wire fence that Texas had put on its border with Mexico to stop illegal migrants and asylum seekers from entering the country. The 5-4 ruling was a sign of victory for President Joe Biden as it came in the midst of an ongoing legal battle that resulted in a federal appeals court forcing agents to stop cutting the fence last month. The Republican governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, has for 2 years sought to stop migrants and asylum seekers from as much as entering the U.S., unspooling razor wire that extends over 46 kilometers of its border with Mexico along the banks of the Rio Grande River and has left people injured and in worn-out shape. He is now touting the right to self-defense from a migrant invasion at the southern border as the state fights a multi-pronged battle versus the Biden administration. Abbott's battles. Abbott is currently fighting multiple legal battles with the administration. The federal government has threatened legal action over Texas' seizure of Shelby Park near Eagle Pass, while lawsuits are ongoing over the administration's cutting of razor wire set up by Texas and the establishment of buoys in the Rio Grande. The Supreme Court found in the administration's favor when it granted an emergency appeal to allow agents to keep cutting border wire set up by Texas along the border. Texas, meanwhile, published images of it strengthening physical barriers along Eagle Pass. The administration has also sued over a recently signed law that allows Texas state and local officials to arrest illegal immigrants. The administration has accused Texas of interfering with federal control over immigration and border security and has said it's putting agents and migrants in danger. Abbott, however, cited constitutional language that demands the federal government protect each state against invasion and the right of states to protect their own borders. Abbott argues that the failure of the Biden administration to fulfill those duties triggers a clause in Article 1 that reserves to this state the right of self-defense. He notes he has already declared an invasion to invoke the authority, which he calls the supreme law of the land, and supersedes any federal statutes to the contrary. The arguments from Abbott are unlikely to dissuade the administration, which has cited Supreme Court precedent for federal control over immigration and border authority.
The state's response to the unprecedented illegal crossings on our border.
To remove it. You can see it here. Texas officials setting up more razor wire yesterday in Eagle Pass.
Federal agents can remove razor wire that the Texas National Guard strung along the Rio Grande.
Texas has argued that the razor wire is repelling migrants from crossing into the country illegally.
The administration has also claimed it's following immigration law and has pointed to numbers of removals since May that outpaced the entirety of FY 2019. Instead, it says it needs more funding from Congress and comprehensive immigration reform to fix what it says is a broken system. The courtroom antics. The fencing at issue in the dispute was installed on private property along the Rio Grande by the Texas National Guard. Texas sued the Biden administration in October, asserting that U.S. Customs and Border Protection agents had no right to cut fencing that it said had been erected with the permission of landowners. In November, U.S. District Judge Aaliyah Moses criticized the administration for failing to stem migration, but said the federal government enjoyed sovereign immunity, protecting it from civil lawsuits and criminal prosecution. A federal appeals court later granted Texas's request to block federal agents from damaging, destroying, or otherwise interfering with the razor wire fencing while the case played out. Lawyers for the Biden administration this year requested it be lifted, arguing there is no indication the wire had stopped migrants from entering the U.S. They said the new barrier also prevented border agents from monitoring and responding to emergencies. This fence has been criticized further by Mexican officials as a violation of international law. Let's look a bit deeper.
in Texas passing a strict new immigration bill. It authorizes police officers to arrest migrants.
The Biden administration has said that it prevents Border Patrol from processing migrants who are already on American soil.
Every time you apply a consequence to a violation of law, you see the number of illegal border crossers drop exponentially.
Operation Lone Star. The fence is part of a wider state effort to take control of Texas's borders. Operation Lone Star, launched in 2021 with significant public support, pushes the legal boundaries of what a state can do to control immigration. The operation, which has cost more than $4.5 billion so far, also includes a floating barrier installed in the Rio Grande. Democratic legislators Sylvia Garcia and Joaquin Castro, both members of the U.S. Congress from Texas, last year decried the barbaric string of buoys which are linked with chainsaw devices to stop crossings. As the number of people crossing the U.S.-Mexico border continues to surge, the Texas operation has become a flashpoint in immigration policy, with critics decrying the inhumane measures.
Well, U.S. Supreme Court decision will allow Border Patrol agents to cut razor wire along the southern border.
Razor wire remains up along the U.S.-Mexico border even after the Supreme Court ruling.
Razor wire, as far as the eye can see, also within my line of sight. Texas National Guard armed and on standby.
This dispute has intensified recently when Texas fenced off a park in Eagle Pass.
Abbott has used the fentanyl crisis to justify his measures, citing a rise in drug smuggling. While Republicans have criticized the Biden administration for the rising numbers, there's also pressure from within the Democratic Party. Politicians like New York City Mayor Eric Adams are slamming the president for not doing more to address irregular immigration as the city struggles to provide housing and other services for the new arrivals. Former President Donald Trump, whom Abbott has backed to be the Republican candidate in November's presidential election, has made immigration a key plank of his bid to retake the White House. Texas unlikely to succeed. A federal appeals court ruled against Texas in its bitter clash with the federal government, deciding that a law allowing the state to arrest and deport migrants couldn't be implemented while the courts wrestled with the question of whether it's illegal. A three-judge panel of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit, which had a reputation for conservative rulings, sided in its 2-1 decision with lawyers for the Biden administration who have argued that the law violates the U.S. Constitution and decades of legal precedent. The panel's 50-page majority opinion left in place an injunction imposed by a lower court in Austin, which found that the federal government was unlikely to succeed in its arguments against the law. The opinion was written by the Fifth Circuit's Chief Judge Priscilla Richmond, a nominee of President George W. Bush, and was joined by Judge Irma Carrillo Ramirez, who was nominated to the bench by President Biden last year. Texas hasn't shown that it's likely to succeed on the merits, she said, after discussing how various arguments made by the state fell short. It was a setback for Governor Greg Abbott, but not an unexpected one. The governor has said that he anticipated the fight over the law's constitutionality to eventually reach the Supreme Court. Mr. Abbott has said the law, which allows the state to arrest and deport migrants on its own, is necessary to deal with the record number of migrants crossing into Texas from Mexico.
Become the new epicenter in a legal clash between the Biden administration and Texas Governor Greg Abbott.
So the court's conservative majority was divided in its 5-4 decision in favor of the Biden administration's argument.
Now we go to the southern border, where the governor of Texas refuses to give in to federal law.
Last year, a lower court ruling barred the federal government from removing the fencing.
Mr. Abbott also said in a speech that the law had been tailored to challenge the high court's precedent in the 2012 case, which was decided 5-3. Lawyers for the state could seek emergency action by the Supreme Court, or they could let the decision stand and wait for arguments set for April 3rd over the substance of the law known as Senate Bill 4 or SB 4 and whether the injunction was appropriately ordered. That argument is set to be heard by the same 3-judge panel. In his dissent, Judge Andrew S. Oldham said that the decision suggested that the panel would similarly decide in favor of the federal government after its arguments. Today's decision means that we'll likely never know how Texas's state courts and its state law enforcement officers would have implemented SB 4, wrote Judge Oldham, a former general counsel to Mr. Abbott, who was nominated to the court by President Donald J. Trump. He said he would have to let the law go into effect as the appeals process moved forward and instead have the courts wait for an actual conflict to arise between state and federal law. The decision was the latest development in a back-and-forth legal drama over the law, a sweeping effort by Texas to create a state-level system of immigration enforcement in direct challenge to the federal government. The law briefly went into effect amid a series of procedural rulings that made their way to the U.S. Supreme Court. A few hours later, an order by the Fifth Circuit panel again blocked its implementation. The legal wrangling created confusion for police departments and sheriff's offices in Texas, spread uncertainty along the border, and caused the President and Foreign Ministry of Mexico to vocally object to a central provision of the law that state courts could order migrants who crossed from Mexico to return to that country no matter their national origin. In her opinion, Judge Richmond dismissed one of Texas's most aggressive assertions that the Texas law should be allowed to stand because the arrival of large numbers of migrants at the southern border constituted an invasion that triggered state war powers under the U.S. Constitution. Even if aspects of the state's arrest law aligned with existing federal law, which makes it a crime to cross into the United States without authorization, Judge Richmond wrote that what happens immediately following an arrest is in striking conflict with federal law. The removal provision would significantly impair the exercise of discretion by federal immigration officials, she wrote, preventing migrants arrested from seeking asylum before being ordered by a state court to leave the country. She added that it would cause international friction and risk taking the United States out of compliance with its treaty obligations. Texas has argued that its law is seeking to fill the gap by the federal government, she wrote, but is unlikely that Texas can step into the shoes of the national sovereign under our Constitution and laws. And that's going to do it for this video, you guys. See you next time, and bye for now.